Good evening. Lord Hippolyte Ignatius Marmaduke O'Crit here. In my career as a representative of Her Majesty's government, I have met people from many nationalities. One thing that has often struck me is how many of these peoples have told me that their father or grandfather saved Britain's arse during the Second World War, how he had fought for Britain and that without him Britain would have lost the war. Now, I acknowledge that Britain owes to the many peoples throughout the world that contributed to the defeat of the Nazi dictatorship, and realise that Britain could not possibly have defeated the Nazis alone. However, one fact irks me, and that is the reluctance of any of these groups to accept the crucial role that Britain played in saving their arses. Yes, you heard me correctly. Britain saved your arses. How is it possible, I hear my American friends splutter into their coffees, without their manpower and industry and their loans to finance Britain's war efforts, loans that we finally paid off in 2002, I believe, Britain would have been sunk. What about the enormous sacrifice of the Soviet Union, my Russian friends might ask? The unstinting loyalty of many Commonwealth countries. India alone raised a volunteer army of 2.5 million men, and the exiles of many subjugated peoples in Europe, not to mention the contributions by many nationalities around the world. Yes, how can I possibly justify such an extravagant statement? Well, let's cast our minds back to the dark days of 1940. Only a miracle saved the British troops at Dunkirk. Nazi Germany had invaded most of Western Europe. Only fascist Spain and Portugal remained on the European mainland, as well as neutral Switzerland and Sweden. Ireland, under Eamon de Valera, wanted nothing to do with Britain. The nearest allies were Canada, some 2,000 miles away. The situation for Britain looked hopeless. It was faced with the prospect of an invasion, and many wanted to come to terms with Hitler. Only the resolve of Churchill, leading the British people, helped us resist. No Britain, no de Gaulle, no exiled Free French government. Another factor might have been the access to the riches of the Belgian Congo. The uranium used to produce the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki came from the Belgian Congo. Without Britain, no Normandy landings would have been possible. Landings in which, incidentally, the US constituted less than half the forces. Think of the repercussions of that. The only routes to attack Germany for the US would have been through the east. Germany would have survived for many more years, perhaps giving their scientists like Werner von Braun time to develop long-range missiles with an atomic warhead that could strike against New York. Without Britain as a foothold into Europe, it would have been exceedingly difficult to topple a Nazi-occupied Europe. But what would have been the consequences for the rest of the world if Britain had come to terms or had been invaded? Firstly, although no invasion came, Hitler still maintained valuable divisions in France with the prospect of invading Britain. When he commenced Operation Barbarossa, divisions that could have aided his invasion. Then, by continuing the war, Britain kept other valuable divisions of the German and Italian armies occupied in North Africa, including one of their most gifted generals, Rommel. What would have been the consequence for the Soviet Union if all these extra divisions had been deployed against them? Certainly they would have been pushed further back in the first triumphant weeks of the Nazi blitzkrieg, perhaps losing major cities such as Leningrad and Moscow. Don't forget as well that the Soviet Union was supplied via Britain and its Arctic convoys. The Mediterranean would have been completely controlled by the Axis powers, giving them access to the oil reserves they so badly lacked. cutting off any access via the Suez Canal. Moreover, no invasion of Italy would have been possible. Most likely Germany would have reclaimed its former colonies throughout the world. Consider the consequences of a German presence in the rest of Africa. What might South Africa have done with a Nazi-occupied Namibia on its doorstep? Would it have encouraged the Afrikaners to side with them? Other parts of Africa would not have remained in Allied hands. General de Gaulle set up his Free France in the French Congo, and ensconced Nazi Europe would have had time to complete its other nefarious aims. How many Jews would have survived? Without them, no Jewish state of Israel would have been formed, a state that prides itself on the killing of British soldiers. Perhaps the US could have concentrated on its war against Japan in the Pacific, one might argue. But again, British troops were involved in the Pacific, and don't forget the massive losses inflicted on Japan by the Soviet Union in the 6 weeks it was at war with it. Surely the US would have been hard-pressed on its Atlantic front, which would have been dominated by Nazi forces. A U-boat blockade of eastern ports and European extremities such as Iceland and Greenland under Nazi control. Britain played a vital role in preventing all this when it stood alone in Europe against the German forces. If Britain had capitulated, you'd all be fucked. So don't forget, when you tell us British how we were saved by you, to say thank you for us for saving your arses as well.
The death of their native soil, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe,